Welcome back to Aaron Talks. Now, back in August, something kind of interesting happened. The first episode, well, technically 2 episodes, of a rebooted Disney cartoon aired. What show am I talking about? DuckTales, of course. Now, as a kid, some of my favorite cartoons were the Disney Afternoon block of shows. We're talking about that block of shows that started in 1987 and didn't end until like 1997. In fact, one of my favorite videos to watch here on YouTube, I've actually watched it a couple of times. If you're not familiar with his channel, The Nostalgia Critic. One of my favorite YouTubers, one of my favorite comedic channels out there. Watch his Disney Afternoon special. It's amazing. It's like 45 minutes long, but he covers the entire run of shows that were on that lineup. The reason I'm talking about it here, though, is because you need to understand something. When I was a kid, it was all about my favorite shows. I mean, I'm sure it was probably the same for you if you're out there watching right now. I loved my cartoons. Now, I was raised on the classics, obviously. My dad's, product of the 50s and 60s and 70s, and as a result, I was raised on things he loved too. Everything from Looney Tunes, which is still his favorite, I might add, to, some of the older Hanna-Barbera stuff. So, I was raised on the classics, but I was also raised on a steady diet of 80s and 90s cartoon shows. One of my favorites of which was DuckTales. Now, I didn't just love DuckTales in the Disney Afternoon. I was a huge fan of Tailspin, Rescue Rangers, Gummy Bears, and of course, shows like Darkwing Duck and Goof Troop. I mean, I must love Darkwing Duck. But here's the thing. The reason I'm bringing this up is, whenever you're rebooting a property of any kind, there's always a chance you take that you're going to alienate the older fan base. And there's a lot of that when you look at things like the new Ninja Turtles movies that Michael Bay produced, or the new Ghostbusters film from last year. Some of us loved it, some of us hated it, some of us fell right in the middle. I was one of the ones that kind of fell right in the middle. So, all of that said, what did I think of the DuckTales reboot? This has to be one of the best reboots I have ever seen property anywhere. Now, the reason I say that is because it hit every nostalgia feeling I had for the property, while at the same time feeling like something new. This is how you do a reboot right. I love this show. From the fact that each of the nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, actually have individual personalities now. The fact that they're actually exploring and giving a little bit more of a mythology to the series, which is interesting. The fact that Webigail Vanderquack actually has a character for a change instead of just being the token girl character. And, of course, the fact that they have basically given me back a piece of my childhood in a really interesting way that I can't wait to see further developed. Now, the reason I'm talking about the show now is because the show proper actually starts again in September. So, I'm really anxious to see what comes after these first 2 episodes that I've already really enjoyed. But I'm also anxious to see what Disney does with the property from here forward, because there's some really interesting Easter eggs, if you're a fan of the Disney Afternoon, that were dropped in that first episode. Spoonerville, which is where Goof Troop takes place. The name is dropped. That location apparently exists within this new DuckTales universe. As does St. Canard, where the terror that flaps in the night, Darkwing Duck, hangs his cape. And of course, Cape Suzette, where Baloo the Bear and Kit Cloudkicker have the Sea Duck, and all of those adventures take place. So the idea that Disney is proposing, at least I feel like, is that there's a possibility that if DuckTales does well, they'll make new versions of all of these other shows too. Other shows that I have just as much of a nostalgic connection to as I do DuckTales. I hope that if that's the case, they're done with just as much loyalty and respect to the original source material as this was. Now, another thing that I haven't really talked about is that this new DuckTales series, while it borrows heavily from the 1987 show, it also borrows very directly from the Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge comics that started back in like the 1920s or 30s. That's an interesting dynamic in itself, because the portrayal of Uncle Scrooge and some of those other characters was slightly different than it was presented in the original 87 DuckTales. It's really adding a new dynamic to this new show that, while it still feels like DuckTales, it's got a little bit more of a darker edge, I think is maybe the phrase I'm looking for. So there you go. That is my initial thoughts on the pilot for the new DuckTales series. I absolutely loved it. I hope all of you watching here will think about subscribing to Aaron Talks. Don't forget to click that bell icon if you enjoyed what you saw here and you want to be notified next time Aaron Talks has a new video uploaded. And of course, don't forget to click that like button. I'm Aaron, I've been talking, and I'll see you guys in Duckburg.